meet again. Don't know where, don't know when.
Yeah, you know what? I'm sick of those idiotic fruitcakes too. You know, with their individual rights and their freedom and their wanting people to be left alone who aren't hurting anybody. You know, free libertarians.
Libertarians are like normal right-wingers, but more crazy. They have all the misplaced smugness, misinformed idiocy, and deliberate ignorance of normal conservatives, but with a big heaping of conspiracy theory to make them more batshit insane. Everything a conservative does, a libertarian wants to do better, like there's some kind of annoying little brother trying to get attention.
Yeah, libertarians are just like conservatives. If you ignore the drug war, isolationism, like tariffs, and immigration restrictions, and increased police and military power. Yeah, they disagree with like half their platform, but other than that, if you overlook that tiny little detail, yeah, they're practically indistinguishable.
Libertarians want to cut out social programs.
Not cut out, fund voluntarily. There's nothing saying libertarians are against charity. You can help the poor and support social programs not at gunpoint.
But they also want to cut things like the Food and Drug Administration.
Because they artificially inflate the price of medication so that underclass people can't afford it. And then lefty dipshits like you complain that we need government to steal from us so that poor people can have their medicine, even though government's the reason the poor people can't have their medicine.
The Department of Education.
If the Department of Education actually worked, I wouldn't be making this video right now.
The Department of Agriculture
artificially inflates the price of food. No, seriously, that's literally all they do. Google Wickard versus Filburn.
To name a few. It's one thing to want to cut government spending on social programs because it goes against your political views.
We don't want to cut them because they go against our political views. We want to cut them because we believe you have the right to spend the money that you earn however you decide.
It's another thing to remove highly successful programs that provide vital and essential services which directly benefit the public, even saving lives in some cases.
Do you have any sources or evidence that suggests that these programs are necessary or helpful? If you're arguing that we shouldn't cut them and that we should keep them, that's going to be kind of important.
Some of the more wacky libertarian fruitcakes like to claim that any department, service, or agency that is not specifically laid out in the Constitution by the Founding Fathers should be eliminated.
The primary purpose of the Constitution is to limit government power, not specifically to vest power to government. So it's unlikely that the Constitution would lay out specifically any programs or agencies to be implemented. It might empower Congress to create such agencies or programs, but it wouldn't in and of itself create them.
Yet these dipshits never seem to apply that morsel of idiocy towards any law enforcement departments, like the FBI, the CIA, the ATF, and so on.
Where does this guy get the idea that libertarians don't criticize law enforcement? Of course we do. Whenever there's a news story about an innocent unarmed person getting the snot beat out of them or even killed, we're some of the most vocal about it.
Nor do they apply towards any kind of military spending. You know, when did the Founding Fathers intend for us to have naked body airport scanners, or military bases in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, we're against those things too.
Thus, it seems the libertarians share yet another trait with the conservatives because, like conservatives, they like to apply their standards and values only towards those things which they do not like. Thus, libertarians, like their conservative cousins, are hypocrites.
Aside from the fact that libertarians and conservatives are not the same thing, the left is just as guilty of this too. They're against discrimination and for equality, but they advocate for affirmative action. They're against greed, but advocate for wealth redistribution.
Libertarians tend to distrust the government, which I actually think is a good thing. It's healthy not to automatically believe everything the authorities tell you. The reason for this is that the government is made up of people, and people tend to have self-serving agendas.
So you're acknowledging that people are susceptible to self-serving interests, but you're still advocating for giving certain people special powers and authorities that nobody else has. That doesn't seem dangerous to you at all?
To a libertarian, though, the government is untrustworthy simply because they're the government.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break.
Yeah, nice try, but the actual reason we tend to distrust government is because the authority, power, and role in society that they have means that they're more susceptible than private sector entities to succumbing to their own self-interest.
Thus, a libertarian thinks the government always lies 100% of the time and is always out to fuck you over. However, this same philosophy extorts that private businesses and corporations never ever lie because it's in their best interest to be truthful, to maintain a good public image and make money.
Libertarians don't believe that the government lies all the time, nor do we believe that private sector companies always tell the truth. These are both imperfect systems ran by imperfect humans. The question is, given what we know about economics and historical precedent, which system is more likely to be trustworthy? In the case of the private sector, there's a way to hold people responsible if they lie or behave dishonestly. You can not do business with them. You can take their income from them. Government, on the other hand, you're forced to pay whether or not they tell the truth or provide a worthwhile service. So while both government and private sector may end up with some unsavory individuals, they're more likely to be held responsible in the private sector.
This leads to ridiculous situations where libertarians want to strip away needed government oversight from vital industries that have proven over and over and over again to be unable to regulate themselves.
Regulators. We regulate any stealing of his property. We're damn good, too.
Can we maybe get some examples then? After all, if what you claim is true, but situations like this have happened repeatedly, it would be fair to assume you can give us at least one example of an industry that went horribly wrong due to lack of regulation.
How many child slave factories?
Contrary to popular belief, free market innovation rather than government regulation is largely responsible for ending child labor.
Or exploiting oil rigs will it take to convince you people that corporations lie as a matter of business?
And you think politicians don't? After all, if you're in the private sector, your competition is essentially infinite, whereas if you're a politician, your competition is one other person.
But what pisses me off personally most about these people is this dumbass idea that somehow taxes are equal to robbery. I don't know who came up with this bullshit, but it needs to end.
Yeah, I agree. Whoever came up with this ridiculous idea that certain people are entitled to a portion of whatever I earn, whether or not I agree to it.
The idea is that since cops work for the government, and since you would go to prison if you don't pay taxes, then essentially the government is using force to extort taxes from you, and it's akin to a mob boss forcing you to pay for protection.
Alright, well let's think about it for a minute. What deal do you get from the mob boss? Pay me and I'll protect you. Don't, and bad things will happen. What offer do you get from government? Pay me and I'll protect you. Don't, and bad things will happen. What exactly is the difference here? Other than the warning letter you get from government isn't made from cut-up magazines.
This bullshit is idiotic on so many levels it's not even funny.
Oh, you didn't mean that it's taxation that should end. It's the idea that taxation is theft that should end. Okay, that's what you meant. Okay, never mind, and I disagree.
First off, when someone robs you, you don't get a say in how much or how it's spent.
You don't really get that much of a say when you're taxed either. The politicians who are in charge get to decide that. Now, it's true that you do get to decide which politician when you vote, but that's kind of like saying it's not robbery if you get to decide who it is that's robbing you.
We in the United States are represented by our elected officials.
Are we though? I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution saying that the elected officials have to represent their constituents. More often than not, the people they represent are the rich and elite. Your interests are usually secondary, if considered at all. This is why all those regulations and agencies he was clamoring on about earlier usually aren't as effective as people think. Because the very big companies and rich people that we need these regulations to supposedly protect us from are the same people largely responsible for their legislation.
That was a rallying cry during the Revolutionary War. No taxation without representation. You are represented.
Well, I never really asked to be represented. What if I'd prefer to represent myself? What if instead of someone else taking my money and deciding how to spend it for me, I can represent myself, my own interests in the free market?
Doesn't matter if the guy you voted for lost, the guy who won still represents you.
Well, if he's not the person I voted for, then obviously he doesn't represent my interests. He represents the interests of the majority. This is another problem with democracy. You're not the one making the decision. The majority of the population is. If you're in the minority, you have the result end up imposed upon you against your will. So if he's trying to argue that taxation isn't theft because we're represented in the matter, even if we accepted all of the premises to this argument, it's still only an argument that taxation isn't theft for the majority. In other words, if we accepted this argument and all of its premises, there would still be people whom taxation is theft for.
So yes, you do get a say in how much you're taxed, in what manner you're taxed, how the taxes are spent, who is taxed, who isn't taxed, and who the taxes benefit.
Actually, you don't, and here's why. Let's start with the fact that I established a moment ago, that under a democracy, the minority is always forced to go along with the will of the majority. You have a choice within the system, yes, but you don't have a choice of the system. This is a game you have to play whether you want to or not. You are at the mercy of whomever the majority of the population is. If the majority of the population stands to benefit the most whilst paying the least, which more often than not is the case, then you're screwed.
You don't like how they're spent? Vote in somebody else, but don't be telling me you have no say, because that's a load of shit.
That's assuming that another candidate that plans to spend it differently is actually running. Yet another problem with democracy. You get to choose, but the state ultimately gets to decide your choices. It's like if a thug knocked on your front door and was like, "Hey, would you like me to punch you in the face or in the stomach?" Oh, well, that's fair, because he let me choose.
Secondly, it's not like taxes are some big evil oppressive action that only liberals and commies engage in. There have only been taxes in one form or another in every human society, on every continent, and every post-Stone Age culture on this planet since the beginning of time.
Well, first let's address this claim that taxation has always existed in one form or another since the beginning of civilization. It turns out many early governments did use voluntary forms of funding. For example, in ancient Greece, wealthy individuals would often donate money to the city-state to fund public temples as a way to receive tribute from the gods. Taxation as we know it today didn't really come around until the late classical period, like during the peak of Rome and imperial China. But even if it were true that taxation has existed since the beginning of civilization, well, there's a lot of things that have existed since the beginning of civilization. Slavery, genocide, disease. That doesn't make these things good or fair.
Be thankful that you were born into a society that actually lets you have a say in what manner you would be taxed, because 99% of all the people ever born didn't get that privilege.
So if a rapist lets the victim decide whether to take it in the ass or the mouth, does that make it not rape? Does that justify it or make it fair at all?
People fought and died so that you get to decide these things in some way. Part of honoring that sacrifice is contributing your part to keep this country running.
Did they also not fight and die for our freedom to decide how to spend our own money?
What makes you dumb shit so special that you think you get to not pay taxes?
We don't believe we're special in this regard to any extent whatsoever. If you don't use government services, you shouldn't have to pay taxes.
What I hear from a lot of libertarians is, I work hard for the money.
Well, you own yourself, therefore you own your time and labor, therefore you own the results of your time and labor, therefore you have a right to your property that you earn. And anyone else who wants to take it from you needs your permission first. That includes government.
Yeah, well, newsflash for you dumb shit, everyone works hard for their money. So, when you work hard for your money, it counts more than when other people work hard for their money. Is that what you're fucking telling me?
No, actually what we're telling you is that every human being is naturally endowed with the right to the fruits of their labor. This right applies equally to everybody. That's why we're critical of taxation, because it implies that certain people are entitled to the fruits of the labor that others have performed.
So suddenly, you're more deserving of keeping your money and not contributing a damn thing towards society.
Well, whoever said we don't want to contribute to society? We're not against taxation because we think we should be allowed to freeload. We're against taxation because we don't have a choice. I don't think I'm entitled free government services any more than I'm entitled free private sector services. I just like to have a choice between the two. You should also know that not all libertarians are against taxation. In fact, most libertarians believe in what's called voluntary taxation. This is the idea that you can pick and choose which government services or programs you want, in the same way you can pick and choose which private sector services you want.
Like, why? Because you're a libertarian?
No, because we're regular people endowed with the same natural rights you and everyone else is. We believe what we believe specifically because we don't think we're better or special than anyone else. But let me ask you this. You seem to have a problem with certain people getting special treatment. So if I own a private sector business, I can only take money from customers if they agree to my service. However, government can just help themselves to my paycheck without even asking me first. No other entity gets to do this. Well, the rest of us need consent in order to get money from people. What makes government so special? Well, they provide services to the public. So does my private sector business. Is it suddenly more important or better when the government provides services to the public? Since you believe it's unfair for libertarians to expect special treatment, why is it that you advocate for government having that very same special treatment?
You know what? Fuck that shit, alright? You dipshits complain when the social services you depend on are cut like everyone else. I never see you fucking dickheads refusing to take any of the benefits from this thievery. You know, where are the libertarians refusing to collect Social Security, huh? Where are the people out there with their signs going, I don't want Social Security? There aren't any. Where are the libertarians not taking advantage of the GI Bill, not collecting unemployment? You know, where's the libertarian refuse government assistance movement? It doesn't fucking exist, alright? So don't tell me you assholes don't want or use government assistance, because you do.
Well, we're not against government programs or government assistance entirely. We'd rather just have these things funded voluntarily or have a choice in the matter. For example, when you do business with a private sector company, say a restaurant or a cable company, does the restaurant charge you for food you don't eat? Does the cable company charge you for channels you don't watch? Well, they kind of do, but that's besides the point. Point being is that this is not a Boolean issue. You can't really say that all libertarians are 100% against any sort of government programs whatsoever, because that vastly oversimplifies what's fundamentally a complex issue.
Truth is, libertarians are a bunch of self-important, stuck-up, hypocritical assholes who only give a shit about themselves and hide behind some bullshit philosophy to justify their own greed.
Well, that's a nice way to talk about people who believe in and advocate for your freedom. That's the thing about libertarians. You can shit on us all you want, but at the end of the day, we still advocate for your rights.
In real life, a nation run by libertarians would be a corporate dystopia, with a government that provided zero social services and zero protections from an unchecked corporate greed.
Well, what would a libertarian government actually look like? Well, because libertarians believe that all interactions ought to be voluntary, it would only have the authority that any individual citizen would give to it. So it's not that there wouldn't be any government services, it's just that they would be provided on a voluntary basis. Each individual citizen would opt in and out. Private sector entities would be able to compete, and this would also help to increase the availability while lowering the cost of these services. Corporate greed would largely be checked by the free market, although you could have the government taking positive steps to promote positive business practices. It just can't do so coercively. The government already uses contracts as a way to voluntarily promote good business practices. There's nothing saying a libertarian government couldn't do the same thing.
Fuck that, and fuck libertarians, alright? I'm tired of these dumb fucks acting like their bullshit philosophy has any rational basis in the real world.
And what's the rational basis for your philosophy exactly? At least we have economic data and historical precedent to back us up. My advice, don't go throwing stones in a glass house. Thank you very much for watching. That concludes this response. This has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.